Hey everyone, welcome back to our SkyTonight program. This is Seth Mayo again, curator of astronomy for the Lowman Planetarium at MOAS. And in this edition of the program, we're covering the dates of August 1st through August 7th. We're going to start things by talking about the constellation of Capricornus that you may have a chance to see rising in the southeast. Then we're going to look kind of nearby, rising east as well. If you stay up a little bit later, you have a chance to spot where that new image of Stephan's Quintet, a galaxy group that was recently imaged by the James Webb Space Telescope. I can show you where that is inside of Pegasus. And then we're going to end with a look at the highlights for the month of August. So let's get to it. If you happen to be gazing towards the southeastern part of the horizon, once it's dark out, you're starting to get a view of a constellation that's quite famous, but might be a little bit hard to see. And that is the constellation called Capricornus, the Sea Goat. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with this constellation because it's one of the signs of the zodiac. And just to explain that again, I'm going to turn on Capricornus here. It's kind of a weird constellation there. And what I'll also do is turn on the ecliptic line. That's the path the sun seems to make in the sky as we go around the sun. And the zodiac signs are formed by that path where the sun enters into these different constellations, determines various zodiac signs. Of course, that's all part of astrology and not astronomy, but many folks are familiar with this constellation because of that. So you'll notice the ecliptic line does move through Capricornus here, and to also help us find it, you'll notice that Capricornus is a bit below and to the right of the Great Summer Triangle. That's now pretty high in our sky at this time of the year, and it's to the left or to the north of those great summer constellations of Sagittarius here and Scorpius there in the south, just after 9 o'clock. So that's a couple ways to find this. Also, to help us out as well, you'll find that the planet Saturn is inside of Capricornus at the moment. And Saturn looks like that non-twinkling star, which really, of course, is a planet that's been shining in this area for some time now. But what I've really been noticing in the constellation are a couple stars up here. Now, you might need to be in a darker place to see this, but the nice thing is there's not a lot of bright stars in this area. It's pretty dark of an area, so any stars that are there still stand out, even if they're not the brightest. So what I have been noticing as I look in this area are stars that are really close to each other. Let me turn off the constellation lines, at least for now, and then we'll turn them back on in a second. So what you can actually find are two stars that are super close to each other right there, and then you have another pair of stars down here. And what you sometimes notice, or at least what I notice, is what looks like this triangle right here. Now, this triangle actually is composed of two different constellations. These two groupings here are part of Capricornus, and this star over here is actually part of Aquarius, another rather dim constellation, another zodiac sign. But refocusing on Capricornus by itself here, sometimes you may notice the stars of it, if you find the right ones, look like a large giant triangle, a very oddly shaped triangle in the sky. Turning the outline back on again, you'll see even a couple triangles, at least how it's shown in Stellarium here. And again, the part that I've been noticing quite a bit lately as I look in this area are these stars very near each other. And I'll explain these here. They're kind of interesting because they're so close to each other. We have these two right here. We have what are called Algidi, or sometimes known as Secunda Gidi, and there's another one very close to it here called Prima Gidi. Sometimes you see them labeled Alpha 1 Cap and Alpha 2 Cap, so there's a lot of different names here. And what Gidi means is it's Arabic for goat or a kid, since a goat is also known as a kid. And those two stars are very close to each other. They're quite noticeable. They're actually not associated with one another. This is called an optical double. So from our perspective, they actually look close to one another, but they're quite far away in reality. But you can notice them, they're quite interesting next to each other. These two goat named inspired stars that we find there. But if we look below it, there's actually another grouping of stars, this time even closer together. Down here, this is called Dabi, or Beta Cap. Beta Capricorni is the name within the constellation. And if you look closer, there is another one associated with it right there. Sometimes that's called Dabi Minor, and the brighter one is Dabi Major. Those you might need binoculars to see both of them. And those are actually associated with each other, or at least they're gravitationally interacting, but they're quite far from one another. Amazingly, those two stars orbit around each other in about 700,000 years. They're about 21,000 astronomical units apart, so that's about a third of a light year apart. So that's quite a distance between them for a binary star system, but they're technically not an optical double because they're actually gravitationally bound together. As opposed to Algidi here, these two there, which are just ones that are next to each other from our perspective. And these groupings of stars actually form the head of the sea goat constellation that is Capricornus. So let's turn on the picture of Capricornus here, and there it is. And I honestly think it's one of the weirdest constellations in our sky, having a goat kind of mixed with a fish. So the head of a goat and the tail of a fish. And actually at the end of this constellation is the brightest star in it, right here, called Deneb Algidi, which means the tail of the goat, because Deneb is Arabic for tail. And again, Algidi is goat. So some of these star names definitely coincide with the part of the sea goat we find here. Now, I've mentioned it before in the past. In Greek mythology, sometimes the sea goat is related to a goat named Almathea, who provided milk to the infant Zeus, the leader of all the gods, when he was a baby. And sometimes is also connected to the god known as Pan, who I'm sure you've seen in mythology or in stories before. This is that kind of half person, half goat creature who is the god of the wild and shepherds and flocks and rustic music, because he carries a little panpipe, or sometimes what's called a pan flute. And this god Pan had turned himself into a part fish when he was trying to escape a scary monster known as Typhon, and he jumped into a river with a fish's back end to get away from this monster from those stories. So those are the usual connections, at least in Greek mythology, to this constellation. So again, this is not the brightest and most noticeable constellation in the sky, but you may notice near the head or the horns of Capricornus those stars that are real close to each other, which I think are quite interesting when you see stars so near each other, either optical doubles like these two here, or actual binary stars but separated by huge distances. So it's kind of neat to see these more obscure constellations up close. Definitely take a detailed look at them to see some of the interesting stars you can find within it. Now, if you're still gazing in the eastern part of the horizon in the evening after sunset, and after you've looked maybe at Capricornus here, you can look a little bit north of that area, still along the eastern horizon, and what you can find more to the east and northeast are the stars of Pegasus, the winged horse, that is starting to rise at this time of the year. Pegasus is actually a fall constellation, but we're seeing it earlier and earlier. Here's the head of Pegasus. It kind of arcs up into the sky here. That's his nose, called Enif. And then we have his legs here. If that's a little hard to see, let's turn on the outline of Pegasus there. When Pegasus is high enough in the sky, you can actually find what's called the Great Square of Pegasus, this big square that forms the body. But that's still pretty low in our evening skies. You gotta wait until about the 11 or even midnight kind of time frame to see more of the constellation. But around this time, around 9 or really 10 o'clock at night, you'll see kind of the beginning section of Pegasus in this area. And what I wanna bring up is the location of an object, or actually a group of objects, that was recently imaged by the amazing James Webb Space Telescope. I'm trying to find an excuse to talk about this telescope in many of our videos right now because it's such an amazing observatory, and it's so cool that we now have pictures from it, and more pictures are going to come from it over time. So I talked about it in a previous episode of an object called Stephan's Quintet, and that's actually located near the legs of Pegasus. It's actually been noticed for quite some time in this area, especially if you have a telescope. And just to locate more of the exact position here, we can of course find it in Stellarium. I searched for it, and there it is. And so what this is a galaxy group. So let's kind of zoom into it here in Stellarium to give us a view of it from pictures from another observatory. And here we go. So this is an interesting galactic group that's been known since 1877. It was discovered by a French astronomer named Edouard Stephan, and that's why it's now called Stephan's Quintet. And what we find here is actually 5 galaxies in this view. And it turns out this is what's called a compact galaxy group. It was the first compact galaxy group ever discovered, and its official group name is the Hickson Compact Group 92. Now, you may have actually seen this galaxy compact group in a unique way and not even knew it. And that's if you've ever seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life, a very famous holiday movie. And at the very beginning of that movie, there's a moment where there are these angels represented by galaxies talking about the story and what's going to happen. And those angels, turns out, are represented by an early image of Stephan's Quintet. So it's even known in pop culture, and you may have seen it already and not even realized it. So again, this image we find in Stellarium is just an observatory view. I'm not actually quite sure which observatory took this picture, but let me show you the James Webb Space Telescope image of it if you haven't seen it already. And here is an image from JWST, and it is absolutely gorgeous, this group of galaxies. Now we can see it in more detail. And this is provided by two different instruments on Webb. One is called NIRCam, which is the near infrared camera, and one is called MIRI, which is a mid-infrared camera. So we're seeing it in different parts of the infrared. And of course, James Webb Space Telescope sees pretty much primarily an infrared, longer wavelength of light than visible light, which allows us to see the deepest and farthest things in the universe and peer through gas and dust. And we're seeing that here in Stephan's Quintet. Now, Quintet means 5. And so we actually have 5 different galaxies here. We have one at the top there, we have 2 here, 1 there, and then we have this beautiful spiral galaxy here. It turns out these 4 here on this right side are actually associated with one another. They're almost 300 million light years away. And even though that's a tremendous distance from us, that is considered a close galaxy group to our own Milky Way galaxy. And so these are the 4 that are actually interacting with each other. And they're colliding and merging and eventually become one galaxy. They'll merge into one. Kind of like our own galaxy and the Andromeda galaxy, which on a collision course will eventually become one galaxy in billions of years as they collide and ultimately come together. These galaxies are going through that process right now, and what we are seeing is that interaction. And as that unfolds, stars get flung away sometimes stars get kind of captured or moved into other places. Sometimes you'll get dust and gas that get squeezed together and it ignites very active star formation, which we find all throughout this area here. So we have what's called tidal interaction, the gravity of these massive objects affecting so many things: star formation, the position of stars, and the overall structure of these galaxies. And this allows us to see the evolution of galaxy mergers in quite a lot of detail, because we feel like the early universe had a lot of this going on. And understanding this process play out can help us understand how galaxies formed and were affected throughout our entire universe, including our own galaxy. This galaxy actually up here has something really interesting in it. It's called NGC 7319, and in the center is a supermassive black hole 24 million times the mass of our own sun. So this is a massive black hole at the center, and there's actually material falling into it and swirling around it that's heating up, and the amount of light there you get is tremendous. It's the equivalent of 40 billion of our suns in light output around that black hole. So it is a monster of a black hole, eating material and swirling it around it, which creates a lot of energy output and light you're seeing in that area. So these are the interacting galaxies here. This galaxy, even though it looks close, is actually more in the foreground. It's actually closer to us at about 40 million light years away. So by coincidence, it's just associated with the galaxies, even though it's actually not close to these other 4 we find much more distant. And this galaxy here, known as NGC 7320, is a beautiful spiral galaxy, so it's kind of tilted more towards us. So it's tilted face on a little bit towards us, which gives a really beautiful view of it. And there's tremendous amount of star formation happening in the spiral arms. That's what you see kind of highlighted here in this kind of orangish reddish color here. So it's a beautiful look at that, and this is the most detailed view of this galaxy group we've ever seen. We're seeing stars we've never seen before, and we're seeing galaxies in the far background, in the distance, that we've never seen before as well. So these are galaxies here that are hundreds of millions, maybe some of them billions of light years away. So we've never seen that many galaxies in the background, and the detail of these galaxies in this way. Now keep in mind, these stars here, which you can see have these really kind of cool diffraction spikes because of the mirrors and because of the supports that hold the secondary mirror on the Webb Space Telescope, are closer to us. So these are stars actually in our galaxy. And what's so amazing is this is such a high resolution image. This actually took almost 1,000 separate images to make this 150 million pixel image that we find here. So you can actually zoom into it if you load the largest resolution version here. And when we do so, you can zoom around here, pan around, and see those galaxies in the distance. And some of those galaxies, especially those red ones, are really, really, really far away. Again, billions of light years away. So we can really zoom in, pan around, and see the detail of these interactions, of the star formation, of the center of this where that supermassive black hole exists. All sorts of really cool features that you can kind of look at as you kind of fly around in a way. There's that cool spiral galaxy there. So absolutely amazing. The joint images from 2 cameras on board James Webb. And heading back to our sky view here in Stellarium, I hope you get a chance at least to kind of figure out the position of this. Even though you can't see with your naked eyes, it's kind of cool to know where it is near the legs of Pegasus, the winged horse, now rising in the east and northeast. And this amazing galaxy group is really helping us understand the evolution and the mergers of galaxies all throughout our universe. Now, as we look at the celestial events for the month of August here in 2022, we're going to start on August 11th, the evening of August 11th, and that's where we're going to find another full moon and also another supermoon when the moon is kind of close to us and full at the same time. So we had 3 in a row. So we had one in June, July, and this last one for the year happens this month in August. The full moon in August is called the sturgeon moon, named after, of course, those fish. And what's cool about the full moon in August here is it's not far from the planet Saturn that's right next to it there. And the moon will be within, or at least nearby, the constellation of Capricornus that we just talked about in this episode, the sea goat there. So you can find those 3 things, the sea goat constellation, Saturn, and of course our full moon rising around that time. Now, just a couple days after that full moon in August, either on the evening of August 12th or the morning of Saturday, August 13th, we have the peak of the annual Perseid meteor shower. This is one of the most famous meteor showers for the entire year. It always happens in the middle of August, and the radiant point is inside the constellation of Perseus. When I find Perseus in the morning, it's rising in the northeast. It looks kind of like a backwards lowercase letter Y. That's like the top of it and kind of the bottom part of the Y there. So you may find in that area this mighty hero or warrior. And nearby that, and we can find it here in Stellarium, is the radiant point for the Perseids we find there. Now, meteors are best seen in dark skies, and the challenge for this year is that full moon that happens just a couple nights before is still pretty large. It's not technically a full moon by then, but you still have a large moon to contend with. And the extra reflected light from the moon can obscure many of the meteors you're gonna find from the Perseids this year, unfortunately. Just the way things go certain years. But that's okay, because the Perseids are so bright and so abundant, or at least they can be, that you still may see some meteors around this time through this weekend. So you have the moon to contend with, but that's okay. It's always worth looking for at least a moment. You may get a chance to catch a stray Perseid meteor, one of the greatest meteor showers you find all year. Heading into Sunday, August 14th, we can talk about Saturn again, because by that time, Saturn, rising in the east and southeast, will be at opposition. That's when it's opposite of the sun in our sky, and we can see it for the entire night. So that's nice for Saturn, having it high enough to see for that long, and this is the closest we get to Saturn in our orbit. So that means that Saturn will be a little bit bigger and brighter than it normally is, which makes it a lot better if you're looking at it through a telescope. Take advantage of these moments, at least around opposition for any planet that can get there. And for Saturn in particular, it's extra special because those rings are always amazing. They don't even look real when you're looking at them through a telescope, but they're really cool. And maybe a moon or two around it, since Saturn has a big moon system in its vicinity. So it's quite an amazing planet to see all night long and close to us during opposition, especially now as we get to the middle of August for this time of the year. Now, as we get to the end of the month here on Saturday, August 27th, we can look to the west and finally see a planet enter that area of the sky. We've kind of been devoid of planets in the west lately. They've all been in the east or in the early morning. But by the end of this month, we have a chance to see the planet Mercury, the smallest planet in our solar system and the one closest to our sun, just above the western horizon here. And on this date, this is when Mercury is at what's called greatest elongation east. That means it's most east of the sun in the sky, which puts it at a high position for us to see in this area just after sunset. That's it for another edition of our Sky Tonight program. Thank you for tuning in. And if you're in the area, please stop by the Museum of Arts and Sciences and definitely the Loma Planetarium, where we're running shows every day. If you want any more information about our programs and our shows, please check our website and tune into our other social media channels. We're posting some really great and fun content from the museum. So hope to see you digitally or in person. Take care, and of course, happy stargazing.